Jerry could have grown up to be an ordinary guy if his mother had brought him up, but unfortunately Mom wanted a girl, so Jerry hardly had a chance. Jerome Henry Brudos was a devoted family man who didn't drink, didn't smoke, and used virtually no profanity. But there was one strange secret in his life: his love of high-heeled women's shoes. Jerome Henry Brudos was born on January 31, 1939 in Webster, South Dakota. When he was born, the country had not yet recovered from the Great Depression. Jerome's father moved his family to Oregon in search of a better life. Unfortunately, there were not many jobs there, so the family often had to move from place to place. Eventually, Brudos managed to find a job and worked tirelessly in 2 places at once. The boys were at home with their mother Eileen at the time. The woman treated her sons differently. She adored the older Larry. He was the sweetest child in her eyes, but she didn't like the younger Jerry. Eileen dreamed that she would have a girl, but instead he appeared. The woman took her frustration out on the innocent man. She verbally and physically abused him, punishing him for every little thing, simply because her youngest son did not live up to her expectations and was not born a girl. When the boy was about 5 years old, he was already left to his own devices. No one was particularly involved in his upbringing. Jerry often went outside and wandered around the neighborhood for hours. One day his feet carried him to a garbage dump where people were throwing away unnecessary garbage. For an inexperienced child, a whole range of amazing objects and devices were uncovered that he had never seen before. And so, in the midst of this wealth, Jerry came across a magical thing called high-heeled shoes. His mother wore the simplest of shoes with flat soles, and the boy had no idea that there was anything more graceful and sophisticated in the world. Jerry was thrilled with his find. He took the shoes out of the garbage heap and brought them home. There he tried them on his feet and began to walk around the room. At this point, Eileen saw him. She shouted that shoes were unsuitable for boys, took them away, and demonstratively threw them in the garbage can. The woman was angry and indignant about these shoes for a long time, and the little boy could not understand what caused such a violent reaction in his mother. Jerry waited until his mother left, then he took the shoes out of the bin and hid them safely. He wore them around the house when no one was around, but it wasn't long before Eileen caught him doing it again. The mother screamed even louder. Then she grabbed his treasure, carried it out into the yard, and set the shoes on fire. As the boy watched in tears as the flames engulfed his shoes, the woman kept reading him a moral lesson about not taking things out of the trash when you throw them away. As the fire burned, Jerry watched and experienced mixed emotions. On the one hand, dislike for his mother, on the other, a strange excitement. And this terrible mixture created a very strong fetish in the guy. In 1955, when Jerry was 15, a family with several teenage girls moved into the house next door. The guy came up with a new entertainment, spying on his young neighbors through the window. One day, while observing them, he noticed washed clothes on a rope in the neighboring yard. Jerry sneaked up on them unnoticed, hid behind the comforter, and then quietly removed the women's underwear and hid it. He then ransacked washed clothes many more times. It got to the point where neighbors called the police and complained about missing underwear. Then Jerry realized why the police officers were coming and decided to use this to his advantage. The next day, when one of the daughters was alone in the neighbor's house, Jerry knocked on her door and pretended to be a police officer with more questions about the missing underwear. Of course, the girl recognized her bumbling neighbor, but she was interested in what he had come up with and decided to play with him. Jerry asked the girl to come over to his house to talk about the theft. When the neighbor appeared on the porch, the guy was beside himself with overwhelming importance. He invited the girl into his room, jumped out the door very quickly, put on a mask, and returned in the guise of a bandit with a knife in his hand. The teenager brandished a gun and forced the frightened girl to undress completely. He then took a camera and took several pictures of the undressed neighbor in various poses. Not knowing what to do next, he simply ran out the door. After removing the mask from his face, Jerry entered his room a few moments later as if nothing had happened. He told his neighbor, who hurriedly put on her dress, that a masked stranger had locked him in a barn. The girl, who understood everything, was ashamed of how stupidly she had been deceived, so she simply ran away and never reported the attack. It was a very exciting moment for Jerome. He felt his strength in keeping his neighbor under his control. He was also left with authentic photos as a trophy that he could look at for hours. The following situation occurred in the spring of 1956. Jerry-brudos was 16 years old. He invited his classmate for a ride in his private car. The girl agreed. She thought it was a pretty tempting offer. Like her neighbor, she didn't expect a trick from the quiet young man. Jerry, with indecent fantasies already raging in his soul, drove through the city. Then he took the car to the outskirts of the city and drove into a small forest. He pulled out a knife that he had hidden earlier and ordered the girl to undress under threat of death. The classmate did not resist but silently pushed the guy away from her and jumped out of the car. However, she was unable to escape as Jerry immediately caught up with her and fell on top of her. From the outside, it didn't look like an attack, but too persistent flirting. A couple driving along the road noticed young people frolicking in the grass and decided to call the police just in case. They did not intervene themselves as they were not sure if the girl was in danger. The officers arrived in time to arrest Jerry and searched his room. Having previously obtained a warrant, they discovered an entire collection of stolen underwear and several intimate photos in his hiding place. After finding the neighbor's Polaroid photos and lingerie, they immediately linked them to a theft in the neighborhood. But instead of going to jail, Brudos was taken to the Oregon Clinical Center for a mental health evaluation and involuntary treatment. In conversations with the doctor, Jerry shared his fantasies and innermost thoughts that came up in him regularly. The teenager told the doctor that he dreamed of having an underground room where he could hide kidnapped girls. He talked about his particular love of women's shoes and looking at indecent photos. Even then, these were warning signs for the psychiatrist, but for some reason the doctor believed that this was a teenage phase in Jerome's life and that it would all go away on its own once the man was an adult. The doctors thought the condition was not that serious. Therefore, they allowed him to attend school and then return to the clinic. After 9 months of treatment, Jerome was deemed safe for society and released. He returned to his family and graduated from high school and college as an electronics technician. Not knowing what to do with himself after that, he joined the army. But he was not destined to become a soldier. Jerry was discharged from the military after a few months because of his strange obsessions. In the end, he had to return home to his mother, who was not too happy about this turn of events. The woman accepted him as a stranger and put him up in a house in the backyard. It was an outbuilding that looked a bit like a garage. Over time, his old habits got the better of him. Jerry started breaking into houses and stealing women's underwear and shoes. He also attacked a woman in broad daylight. The young man could sit in his car in the parking lot for hours. One day he noticed a very attractive lady returning alone from her lunch break. Jerry quietly approached from behind, grabbed her by the neck, and when the woman lost consciousness, he took off her shoes and disappeared. The woman survived, but she never knew who had attacked her. When Jerome was 23, he met 17-year-old Ralphie. The young people liked each other, the girl became pregnant, and in the spring of 1992, they married. For the first few years of his marriage, Jerry was incredibly happy. They moved to Portland, Oregon, and when their second child was born, Brudos' mother moved into their home to help care for her grandchildren. Ralphine married at a relatively young age, so she didn't immediately pay attention to some of her husband's oddities. For example, he often made her undress, wear only high-heeled shoes and pose for photos, or he would ask his wife to try on the underwear he had always brought from somewhere. Ralphine would later say that she had no idea the items were stolen. Over the years, the wife grew tired of indulging her husband's weaknesses and she gave up on his strange photo shoots. Jerry left his fantasies unfulfilled because Ralphine no longer played with him, but then he was overcome with the desire to add new treasures to his collection. He started going out and stalking women. One day, as Brudos was walking through the city, he noticed a pretty lady hurrying to the bus stop. The man followed her and jumped on the bus with her. He followed the woman to the house and stayed outside to watch. Through the curtains, Jerry saw how the woman had eaten dinner, showered, and got ready for bed. He waited a little longer after the light in the room had gone out. Then he entered her house, crept quietly to her dresser, and began carefully opening the drawers to find underwear. At some point, Jerome pulled too loudly on the box and the woman woke up to the noise. The woman saw the robber and screamed loudly. He then lunged at her and began to squeeze her throat. When the woman went limp, this triggered a wild desire in her attacker. He took advantage of her helplessness and took possession. After savoring the still, supple body, Brudos calmly grabbed his high-heeled shoes and walked away. The woman came to her senses and reported the attack to the police. But investigators found no clues as to who might have done it, and Jerry felt unpunished. His confidence grew with each new attack. It was 1967 and Jerry was 28 years old. He was still married to Ralphine and worked as an electrician. There was a basement in her family home where the man developed film and kept his trophies. Brudos made this room his personal dark room and strictly forbade his wife and children to go near the cellar, let alone go there. The man spent all his free time on the first floor. Between 1968 and 1969, women began disappearing in Portland. Jerry's first victim was a 19-year-old girl named Linda Slauson from Aloha. She went door to door selling encyclopedias, and when she arrived at Brudos's house, the man was working in the garden. He expressed interest in the purchase and invited the girl to get his wallet. While she was looking around, he attacked her from behind, hitting her on the head and cutting off the air supply to her lungs. While the girl lay dying, Jerry went upstairs to his wife and children. He gave Ralphine money so she could take the kids somewhere for dinner, and when he stayed home alone, he went down to the basement and started dressing the girl in various stolen underwear, taking pictures and changing poses. He played with her like a giant doll. And when he had satisfied all his needs, he wanted to keep some of his power and deprived Linda of her left leg. Jerry kept the leg in a freezer in the basement, and from time to time he took it out, put on different shoes and photographed it again. That was his muse, he called it. In the evening, after waiting for the family to go to sleep, he put Linda's body in the trunk of his car. He grabbed an old car part, tied up a load and lowered the body of the deceased into the Longton River. Linda Slauson unwittingly discovered a new way for Jerry to find pleasure. He experienced incredible arousal from his actions. For a time, Brudos satisfied his desires and behaved like an ordinary husband and father. During this time, the family moved to Salem, where they rented a new house with a detached garage. Jerome then made this space his workplace. Again, he forbade his wife and children to go there. 10 months passed before he committed his next crime. In November 1968, Brudos was coming home late at night when he saw a car parked on the side of the road and a girl looking confusedly under the hood. She was 23-year-old Jane Whitney from McMinnville. Her car stopped, but she didn't understand what the problem was. For Jerry, of course, this was a new opportunity to test his power over a weak woman. He volunteered to help, but told her they had to go to his garage first to get some tools. After Jerry convinced Jane that it was unsafe to be alone on the street at that time of day, he invited the girl to get into his car. The man pulled the car into the driveway and ran to get his tools. Satisfied, Jane settled into the passenger seat, not even realizing that her life was about to end. Jerry came back, opened the back door of the car, and before the girl had time to realize anything, he threw a belt around her neck. Then he dragged Jane into the garage and let his perverted imagination run wild. He hung the body on a rope and did the most horrible things he could think of. Jerry kept the body in the garage for about 5 days, and only an absurd accident forced him to finally get rid of the lifeless girl. Jerry, who was in high spirits these days, decided to go on a family trip with his family for the weekend. And while the Brudos family were away from home, a traffic accident occurred near their house. The driver lost control, went off the road, and crashed directly into the wall of Jerry's garage. The arriving police quickly inspected the damage to the building. They shone flashlights but did not go inside. The criminal was literally about to be exposed. The worried man hurriedly returned home, waited until nightfall, and took the body to the river to throw it away. Jerry got away with his machinations for a long time. He amused himself by hanging out in the garage or simply watching attractive women, and he was always on the lookout for the one who would be his next prey. Karen Sprinker was a student at Oregon University. A 19-year-old student, she was supposed to meet her mother for lunch at a department store in downtown Salem on March 27, 1969, but she never showed up. Jerry snuck up behind her as usual, shoved the girl into the car, and took her to his garage. This time he didn't take her life right away, but hung her up so that Karen had to stand on tiptoe, or she would have died. The man took a few photos, enjoyed the young body, and went to the house to have dinner with his family. When he returned, the girl showed no more signs of life. She couldn't stay in the awkward position for long. To leave a reminder of a successful hunt, Jerry cut off Karen's chest, painted it with bronze-colored spray paint, and tried to make himself a real trophy. Then he got rid of the body too, threw it into the river and weighed it down with an engine block. After Brudos tried twice more to kidnap the women but failed, he decided to change tactics. The man went into a store and bought a fake police badge. As he strolled through the parking lots of stores in Portland, he eyed the passing ladies. One day he noticed a stranger walking to her car with a pile of bags. It was 22-year-old Linda Sale. The young woman went into the store to pick out a gift for her boyfriend's birthday, but bought a few extra miscellaneous items and went to load the bags into the car. Jerry realized that this was his chance. He posed as a security guard, showed a police ID, and explained to Linda that there had been a series of thefts. He told her to go to his car and drive straight to the police station to give evidence. Instead of going to the police station, he took Siley to this unfortunate garage. He threatened her with a knife, forced her to undress, and arranged a photo shoot. Afterwards, he had fun getting rid of the girl by throwing the body into the river. Linda Sale became Brudos' last victim, for on May 10, 1969, a lone fisherman made the most terrible discovery of his life. Sam Wallace was looking for a fishing spot on the Long Tom River. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that it was a human body. Wallace rushed to his car and drove to a nearby gas station to call the police. Benton County Sheriff's deputies rushed to the river. They noticed purple streaks on the woman's neck. The body itself was tied to a heavy car transmission with a nylon rope. Police later determined that the body belonged to Linda Sale, one of the missing girls. Divers assumed that there might be other bodies nearby and investigated the river bottom. And 2 days later, they found the dead Karen Springer. Both girls died by strangulation. The weights attached to the bodies indicated that someone was obviously trying to hide their crimes. It was also discovered that the rope was tied in a very unusual way, used by electricians. Investigators had no idea how to approach this case, so given the ages of the dead girls, they headed to the college and simply began interviewing female students. After spending several days talking to college students and interviewing about 100 girls, the investigators finally found the one they were looking for. One of the students told them about a strange guy who had been lurking around campus for several days. One day he started a conversation with her, the subject of which seemed strange to her, so the girl hurried to leave. Thanks to the description of the student and the statements of the women the suspect tried to kidnap, the police were able to find Jerome Brudos. They also learned that the man had been arrested at a young age for assaulting a teenager and was being treated at a hospital in Oregon. The problem, however, was that there was no evidence linking Jerry to the crimes. An investigator expressed a desire to get to know the suspect better in order to find clues. He found Jerry in his garage. When he opened the door, the detective noticed a rope hanging from the ceiling. Noticing the detective's interest, Brudos approached the rope and cut a small piece of it. He confidently said that he could give him something if he liked the rope. It seems that the criminal himself gave the evidence into the policeman's hands, but Jerry was too daring, as most criminals are. He sincerely believed that he would never be caught. That same day, a piece of rope was sent to a forensic expert who confirmed that the nylon cord from the garage and the cord found on the bodies caught in the river were identical. This made it possible to obtain a search warrant for Brudos' car. However, when the officers reached Jerry's house, the interior of the car was completely wet. The owner of the car explained that the child had left the windows open when he was at the car wash. The investigators were very upset because any evidence that could have been in that car was now permanently destroyed. The arrival of the police still frightened Jerry, and that same day he packed his things and headed for the Canadian border. He was arrested on May 25, 1969. Brudos remained silent during the interrogation, but not for long. This man liked to talk and eventually confessed to 4 kidnappings and the massacre of girls. He even told investigators that he had tried to electrocute one of them to see what would happen. Jerry's house and garage were searched and numerous photos of women were found there, women's legs and high-heeled shoes. In one of the photos, there was a mirror behind the girl, capturing the criminal's reflection. This was the final confirmation of Jerry Brudos' guilt. The perpetrator received 3 consecutive life sentences for each girl. The body of Linda Slocum was never found, so they could not charge him for it. Jerome Brudos was incarcerated in Salem prison for 37 years and died of an incurable disease in March 2006 at the age of 67. His wife divorced him in 1977 and left the state with 2 children. She has since changed her name, not wanting to remember her family life and trying to protect her father's children.